Hello, it's Jihe. This month I participated in OC-tober, a month-long drawing challenge where each day you draw your original characters according to a set of prompts. I started drawing more seriously during lockdown, and I'm always looking for ways to improve because I have many personality traits that even I find exhausting. So this month, I used my friend Stormith's prompt list and got very busy. My arm still hurts a little bit, but I might be addicted to drawing now. I don't know. I studied up on line weight this month and decided that this whole challenge would be dedicated to working on my inking, and I think it improves a lot by the end. I started with day 1, newest OC, and even though I do have newer OCs, this one was the most recently updated design, since I usually decide characters' appearances last during the character creation process. I think that's a bit unusual for an artist, but I've been writing a lot longer than I've been drawing, so that probably has something to do with it. Her name is Aphrodite, and she's a neuroscientist and professor who doesn't know that she's actually an android built by her husband after her human body died. I've already written out her story and I want to make it into a comic soon, so keep an eye out for that. For this drawing, I kept it simple and just drew her sitting at a desk smiling at the viewer. Her husband is probably trying to take a candid picture of her grading papers, but she noticed. Aphrodite is a strong person, and she's not afraid to ask hard questions or explore new frontiers, and she loves going to the beach and getting brunch with her best friend Daphne. I'm really excited about her story, so you'll be hearing more about that soon. But for now, take the sketch. For day 2, modern AU, I drew one of my older OCs, in terms of her creation date, not her age. Her name is Se, wearing a bunny hoodie because I think she would if she lived in modern times. She'd love Line Friends and Hello Kitty and cute things like that. I think I made the first version of her when I was like 15, and she's been through a ton of revisions since then. Her personality is pretty much the same though. She's shy and sweet and very anxious all the time. She thinks of herself as a weak person because she's underconfident and a bit of a pushover, but she has her own kind of resilience that makes her strong, in my opinion. Right now, I have her living in a fantasy world based on medieval Korea, and she's training to be a mudang, or traditional Korean shaman. She can communicate with spirits and sometimes predict the future. The evening of day 1, I watched some very helpful tutorials about line weight that basically said lines are thicker where there is more shadow and also where you want the focal point to be because the eye will be drawn to the point of most contrast. I'm not sure how to balance those two aspects because sometimes the shadowiest spot is not necessarily where I want the focus to be, but I'm learning as I go here, and I think this one certainly turned out better than the day 1 sketch, so I'll take it. This character has been through a lot of life stages with me, and I like her more just because of that. But this is actually the first iteration of her character that's had an actual visual design, so it was fun to draw her for the second time ever. And it was also satisfying to see improvement in the line work, even from this sketch to the one in the top right corner, because that was my first time drawing her like only a few months ago. For day 3, I went off prompt, but I'll talk about it in another video. You'll see that I skipped a bunch of days in this video, but I'll be discussing those drawings in other videos, so keep an eye out for those. For day 4, hair up, I began a 3-part drawing. So first, I drew my OC Tu-nga, who is from an X-Men inspired comic idea I never wrote out, but I'll probably make a short comic for it at some point, but that's why her name is a silly pun. It's a comedy. She's a Philippine-American high school student who's really good with technology, and she acts as tech support for the main heroes. In her world, powered people don't tend to advertise that they're powered, but Tu can't really hide that she's one of the powered people because of her horns, so she gets ostracized in school. She also doesn't fit in because she's a bit socially awkward because she's very blunt and straightforward, but she doesn't realize it. Honestly, I didn't set out to make an autistic character when I first created her, but I based her on myself a lot, so I guess it checks out that she ended up being autistic. She spends most of her time at school alone until she meets the other 2 main characters, who you'll see in a second. I didn't use a pose reference for this drawing, but I've also never drawn this pose before, and I think you can tell. But basically, she's holding a hair razor, and she's supposed to look like she just screwed up and is trying to figure out what to say about it. She's always brutally honest without trying to be because she's just really straightforward, so she's probably just about to announce her mistake, but that doesn't mean she's excited about it. Definitely one of my favorite aspects of learning how to draw is trying to give characters their own unique facial features, and also trying to communicate different feelings based on the subtleties of facial expressions. I'm not very good at it yet, but I definitely like to experiment and see what kinds of unflattering but expressive faces I can give my characters. I think I tend to draw more facial wrinkles and lines than other artists I talk to, but I don't know how to do certain expressions without those, so I just try to strike a balance between expression and making them still look their age and not like a wrinkly grandpa. Unless they are a wrinkly grandpa, of course. As you can see from the top right reference of this character as well, I haven't drawn her in literal years, so it was nice to see how my style has changed and my skills have improved from back then. For day 5, Neglected OC, I drew the main character from Two Story named Deok Young-ha, but everyone calls him Ducky. His name isn't a pun, but I was researching Korean given names out of curiosity, and honestly, a lot of them have subtleties in pronunciation that are very hard for English speakers to pronounce, and they end up getting called unfortunate things by English speakers who are trying their best, but it's just not right. I've met a lot of fellow Korean American kids who tried to keep their Korean names instead of getting English names, and people just butcher their names so badly. I had a teacher whose name was Pum, but people pronounced it Bum. As I was thinking about that, I got very attached to the idea of a character with a Korean name going by Ducky. So Ducky is also one of the powered people, though people can't tell just by looking at him, so he passes as unpowered. His power is controlling dust, and his hobby is taekwondo. And when a small-time supervillain threatens his hometown, he uses his skills to intervene, and thus involuntarily becomes a hero, with some encouragement from his best friend, who we'll meet in a minute. For this one, I used myself as a reference for the hand on the face and for the stressed out hand, and I think the hands came out pretty normal looking on this one, so I'm happy about that. Ducky is an anxious person, and he's reacting to Two's haircutting mistake, which you'll see in a moment. Honestly, it probably doesn't warrant this level of reaction, but Ducky is nervous all the time, so he's afraid of what's about to go down. I realized during this challenge that I have a fair number of characters who are just really anxious for no reason, and I guess as someone with anxiety who overthinks a lot of things, I tend to inject the nerves into my characters often. Sorry guys. But also like me, Ducky has a younger sister who is a devoted emo. My sister is no longer a devoted emo, but we both had a bit of an emo phase in middle school, if you could call it that. Her more than me, though. And since it's an integral part of adolescence, I think it's funny for Ducky to look at his unapologetically emo little sister and just wonder what's going on in her head, you know? Ducky himself was always too much of a people pleaser and goody two-shoes type of person to fully commit to an emo phase, so he is confused by his sister. Yeah, if you guys are ever curious, I could share some of the OCs I came up with in my emo phase. It'd be intensely embarrassing, but it might be funny as well, so let me know if you're interested in that. For the final part of this drawing, we're temporarily skipping to day 20, haircut, and I drew the third member of this trio, Garland O'Hare, who definitely has one of my favorite character names of all time, and who has unfortunately just had a bald spot shaved onto his head. He normally has his hair spiked, but I figured people usually have wet or at least unstyled hair for a haircut, so I just imagined what it might look like unstyled. He goes by Gar, and he's Jewish and Irish American, and he's obsessed with self-care, but he does it so aggressively that it's debatable whether it's self-care or not. That's the running gag with him. Unlike Ducky and 2, he doesn't have any mutations or powers, but his passionate and fearless attitude makes him the real driving force behind the hero team. He and Ducky are longtime best friends, and they first met at Taekwondo, and when their hometown got attacked by that villain, Gar encouraged Ducky to use his powers to stop the villain behind the scenes, while Gar distracted the bad guy by taunting him. Ducky was very stressed out, but Gar trusted him, just like he trusted 2 with the razor here, but this time it didn't work out for him so well. It's unfortunate, but Gar is the type of person who would give 2 a second chance, even if she doesn't even want it, so who knows? Who knows how the haircuts will go in the future. I'm very pleased with how these guys turned out all together in one drawing, because honestly, I didn't plan it very well, but they just coincidentally happened to fit the right height differences, and have Ducky and 2 both looking right at Gar's bald spot. I'm not sure how I did that, but hey, it worked. Skipping to day 11, Alice in Wonderland, I drew another one of my oldest OCs, Ko, who is best friends with Se and also has a hopeless crush on her even though she'd never admit to it. She and Se are meant to be opposites on some level, where Se wants people to like her and is kind to everyone, Ko hates people and gives everyone dirty looks all the time. She has healing powers, but I find that most healer characters, like especially female ones, tend to be either the ray of sunshine and or the mom friend in their groups. So I decided to go the opposite way with Ko. She does not do emotional labor for anyone, even herself. And she's not meant to be a nice person, but she's not particularly snarky or aggressive, just kind of brooding and quiet, and that carries over to very grim bedside manner that she doesn't care enough to fix. But she does love reading and telling stories, so if she notices someone she actually likes is feeling down, she might try to make up a story to entertain them or distract them. For the art, I referenced John Tenniel's Alice in Wonderland illustrations and did a kind of baby study on it. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'll probably do more studies on Tenniel's art in the future. For day 13, Happy Memory, I chose another character from Se and Ko's story, Haeryun. I'm not really sure of her background yet, but I do know she's a member of the royal family and wants to rule the country one day, but the problem is that she has 2 older brothers in her way. So even though she's from the same story as Se and Ko, she's a relatively new addition to the cast and is actually named after a classmate I met in college who had a really regal name in my opinion. So when her father is injured in battle and will probably die, her ambitious brother tricks her into setting off on an impossible quest to cure their father by petitioning a fabled wish-granting dragon in a hostile country, only to put a bounty on her head after she quote-unquote defects. Haeryun is a very guarded person because she grew up with a lot of expectations, especially from her emotionally abusive mother, so even though she wants to help others and do good on the inside, she projects an aura of calculated coldness because she's afraid of getting close to people and doesn't want people taking advantage of her feelings, which are secretly really intense and somewhat fragile. In the drawing, I decided to draw a happy memory from her childhood where she visits her mother's koi pond and admires the fish. She has a relatively good, if not a bit competitive relationship with her oldest brother, not the one who tricked her, who used to spend time with her watching and feeding the fish, so she has a lot of good memories associated with the pond, of simpler times when she didn't have to be so cutthroat and competitive. Between this one and the previous drawing, I watched a video on backgrounds and how to suggest detail without actually drawing all the detail, so I gave those tips a go here, and I'm pretty pleased with the results. Though there are a few places where I just straight up forgot to color, don't look too hard. I also used references of the last princess of the Joseon dynasty for her outfit, and that was a pretty interesting topic to research as well. I could go into that, but I won't. I did struggle a bit with the perspective on the bricks around the pond, and honestly, I always picture the pond as round, or at least not a perfect rectangle in my head, but I was already struggling enough with the perspective on the rectangular pond, so I decided to just go with it for now. One day I'll draw a round one. The rocks and trees and bushes were relatively easy because I've drawn all those things before. I literally have sketches of random piles of rocks in my sketchbook, referenced from Google Images, because I figured rocks were a good way to practice lighting since they're smooth and relatively uniform, texture-wise. Kind of like how every art class you have to draw a bunch of eggs to practice lighting, but rocks are a level above eggs, you know? One thing that was honestly tedious and boring to draw on this one was the designs on Haeryun's hanbok. I don't love how it turned out, but I think it's good enough that you don't get distracted by it, and it reads fancy from afar, so that's good enough for now, I suppose. It probably would have been more interesting if I'd been doing this one in color, but I committed to working on inking this month, so that's what I did. I think it turned out alright. Skipping to day 18, favorite OC ship. I also combined this one with day 9, Idol Band AU, secretly because, well, it's not a secret anymore, but I started this one intending to post it on day 9 and didn't finish it until day 18. So anyway, I drew my OCs, Sage and Nam, as an indie rock band. Now, this one was a doozy, mostly because of the drum kit. I've never drawn a drum kit or an electric guitar before, so I decided to keep the instruments relatively vanilla in design. I also didn't play either of those instruments, so I've never spent a lot of time like contemplating the shape or design. So though I know there are cooler looking drum sets and electric guitars out there, I decided to go basic. Plus, Sage and Nom would be a low budget garage type situation, but they jam out, you know? They're from an all ages fantasy story that I've been working on and off for a few years now with my sister. The story has gone through so many changes, and to be honest, it's probably not done changing drastically, so I'm not going to say much about the world building or plot. But basically, Sage is a novice inventor from a poor neighborhood, and Nom is the son of a rich land developer who decides to invest in Sage's inventions in an effort to impress his dad. They end up going on an adventure together and meeting other friends along the way, but they're the two main characters. Nom is like a typical shonen protagonist, and Sage wants to be a typical shonen protagonist, but she's anxious. She's the smarter one of the two, but she can get overwhelmed by emotions and make rash decisions. But unlike Nom, who'll just roll with it, Sage stops when she's realized and freaks out about her rash decision. If they were in a band together, Sage would be the songwriter and Nom would be a better performer, but he'd probably use the cymbals too much and improvise on stage. Now, to be fair, I just kind of threw this up on favorite OC ship day, but it's probably not my favorite OC ship. I mean, Nom will have a crush on Sage from day one, but Sage will have several love interests over the course of the story, and there's another character who will have a crush on Nom for a bit and then get over it. My sister likes the idea of Nom and Sage as endgames, so I'll probably go with it just because of the two main characters, and that's how it usually goes. But I don't tend to get super excited about ships in general anyway, so if I didn't pick these two for favorite OC ship, I probably just wouldn't have posted anything. Romance is one of my least favorite genres, if not my least favorite, so it's usually more of an afterthought in my work because I know romance is more marketable. Now, I love exploring relationship dynamics in like already established relationships, but the like how they got together part is just not that interesting to me. I don't know why. But anyway, back to the drawing. I gave Nom a broken drumstick from The Passion, inspired by my friend Izzy, who plays drums, and sometimes posts stories of the broken sticks. Follow her at IzzyBuilds on Instagram for cool cosplay builds. Lining that drum kit was a terrible experience in trying to draw a circle with perspective. And I realized during this challenge, because of this, and also later drawing a wheelchair user character for the first time, like I've drawn him before, just never his chair, but I realized that I need to practice drawing cylinders in perspective more. I'm not sure how yet, but I'll find something. But anyway, I also looked up K-pop fashion to try to get outfit inspiration, but I ended up going with really simple outfits anyway because K-pop fashion is too complicated, and I was already drawing a full drum kit. I'm not super pleased with how this one turned out for a variety of reasons, but that's okay. I mean, I drew a lot of things I've never drawn before, so I think it was worth it. It's a cute concept at the very least, so, you know, I'll take it. So those were the sort of miscellaneous drawings that I did for OC-tober. I'll do a separate video talking about the ones that fit into more obvious themes, like my D&D character and her party, and one about these extremely old OCs that I think would be funny to look back on old versions of. But thanks for watching, leave a thumb up and subscribe if you enjoyed, and check out my Etsy shop if you like my work. Tell me in the comments about an original character of yours, whether old and abandoned or fresh off the presses, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!